Good morning, everybody. So I feel before I start my sermon, I should probably introduce myself a little bit. My name's Matt Grubbs. I'm a member at Hilltop United Methodist Church over yonder. I'm a graduate of Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, and right now I'm in the process of becoming a pastor for the Methodist Church. I'm reformed from the Presbyterian ways, and I saw the error of my judgment. I'm here with my wife, Amanda. She's in the front. She's still Presbyterian. I haven't convinced her to see the light yet. But I digress. There was a poll I read a while back. It startled me in a lot of different ways. The poll was conducted by the American Bible Study, and I read it as part of a Huffington Post article, which I'm not going to get in detail with. But the numbers are very staggering. The question was, how much do Americans read the Bible? And the starting statistics look very promising. They should be happy news for most of us. 80% of Americans own a Bible. 61% wish they read it more. And an average American household owned 4.4 Bibles. So I guess it's a Bible in just the first chapter of Genesis. So you're probably thinking to yourself right now, those numbers sound very, very good. 80% of Americans at least own a Bible, and 61% want to read it more. But then the other numbers kick in. Those who own a Bible, only 57% read their Bibles less than 4 times a year. And 26% of that 57 read their Bibles regularly. That's once or twice a week. So out of those 80% of Americans, only 57% of them read the Bibles more than 4 times a year. So now I'm going to let you think about that. Without a show of hands, we'll keep it strictly confidential. How many of you can say you only really know the famous stories of the Bible? The Bible stories you were taught in Sunday school, like David versus Goliath, like Jesus feeding the masses, and etc. How many of you can say that you know the Gospels fairly well? How many of you know the Gospels plus the writings of Paul and the epistles? And then, how many of you know 1 or 2 books of the Old Testament and then most of the New Testament? That's where most Christians will kind of fall in. And then how many of you know anything about the late letters of the New Testament, from which our Bible passage comes from? I'm not going to scold you for not reading your Bible enough, but there is an important thing you need to know about the book of Hebrews before we start our lesson. That Hebrews was written for a church that lost faith. Now, this is a very important thing when reading through the book, that you know that this is for a particular audience, that this is for a church that is going through a hard time. The main debate that happens is what happens if and when a person loses salvation. How to deal with the issues of a church that's losing its faith. Our passage seems kind of innocent at the top. It just talks about the salvation of Christ, all the things he's done for us, how his once and all sacrifice is where we receive our grace. But I think the challenge comes in the first line. Christ did not enter a man-made sanctuary, but he waited to receive the one in heaven. At first, this makes me kind of angry. Is our human sanctuaries not good enough for God? Is our man-made structures and churches not a good enough for God to enter? Did Christ just skip over our man-made structures? And then I ask the question, well, what if the King of Kings entered the church today? What if he was coming over today to preach? I know how many of us would like to think it would play out. We would like to think that we would just throw this massive celebration, this giant party. Christ would be our guest of honor. We would break the bank on the food budget alone. We would spend hours and weeks before he came over to make sure every light bulb was replaced and everything was clean and sparkling. We'd polish every banister. We'd make sure everything was set up well because he is our guest of honor. We would like to think we would give him the royal treatment he never got on earth. That we would give him everything that he deserves. This is how we would want to react to this. This is how our dream scenario would play out if Christ was coming over. We'd set up the church, put on our Sunday best, and welcome him with open arms, with great fanfare. It's a great celebration. But I don't think that's how we would honestly react. It kind of reminds me of a story of a church getting ready for their new pastor. Now, he came highly recommended. He had a list of achievements and degrees. So the church, expecting this new pastor, wanted to put their best foot forward. So weeks before he entered the church, they cleaned it. They made sure everything was perfect. Church members would come in every day to clean and prepare and fix things that broke a while back, leaky pipes, the whole 9 yards. Made sure all the banisters were polished. They made sure that their church was clean and ready for the new pastor. The only thing that they really had to deal with that was unexpected is a new homeless person was taking up residence near their church. Most of the members going in and out of the church cleaning just ignored him. But a couple elders took issue with it, wanting everything to be absolutely perfect. So they went out and tried to convince him to go someplace else. And it appeared that the homeless person had mental health issues because he was just saying, no, this is the place I need to be. This is my new home. I need to be here. So rather than making a big issue about it, they just let him be and let him stay back. He was kind of in an alley near the church anyways. He wasn't going to be noticed by the pastor. And then comes the first Sunday where the pastor was supposed to be there. And to their dismay, the pastor didn't show up yet. So like a good church, they went on ahead anyways. They just got one of the lay members to go up there and liturgize and do the normal steps that a church service goes through to make sure that everything was going as smoothly as possible. They picked their most senior elder to go forward and start talking. They go through the hymns, and by the second hymn, the homeless man wandered into the church and sat in the back. Some of the people just ignored him like they did all week. And some of the people looked with disgust and anger that he entered their church, that he took their clean space and made it dirty by being there. So as it gets time for the Bible passage to be said, and the final hymn just before the passage was sung, The homeless man wandered forward, standing in front of the pulpit, and announced that he was the new pastor. That he was acting like a homeless man to see how the church members would treat him. Most people wept on the spot. He took off some of his rags, and then he read for his entire sermon one passage. Matthew 25:40. The king will reply, I truly tell you, for whatever you do to the least of my brothers and sisters, you do to me. This is how I think we would probably more likely react to Jesus coming. He'd be the homeless man that wandered in. He'd be the person that we kind of scoffed at and ignored most of the time. I don't think he would get the King of Kings welcome that we would want to give him. To be honest, thinking of yourself critically, you think they would give him this reaction? Jesus never entered a town with great fanfare if he could avoid it. For the entire book of Mark, or for most of the book of Mark, he tells people not to tell anyone that he was around. And if you're being honest with yourself, you wouldn't treat him like a king of kings, closer to a common beggar. I wonder myself if I would give him the fanfare and the royal welcome he deserves. Would I pretend that he was somebody I could just walk by? And really thinking about all the things that Christ did. He came to establish a new temple and not to fix the old. Christ did not come to say that our old ideas and our old ways were the right way, but to make things new. He did not he did not fix the temple, but built it over the ruins. He was not good enough for men, even though he was King of Kings. The temple on earth was not good enough for him. So, knowing how we would actually react, let's think about it. Would we react more like a Pharisee or Sadducee and treat him like a homeless beggar wandering in? Or would we open our doors and gates and open our hearts to the Lord rather than treating him like a second-class citizen? We need to do as the pastor's sermon simply called. We need to do for the least of my brothers and sisters as you did for me. We need to treat each other with loving and respect, because they might be the next Christ.